Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Ray the Flying Squirrel here, and I am back for the likes of the Maxi Toys videos. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening Remake for the Nintendo Switch. So last time, we essentially did manage to traverse into the 8th and the final dungeon in the game, specifically in terms of collecting those instruments of Sirens, and that's gonna take place in Turtle Rock. And oh no, we actually did that particular dungeon pretty okay. I mean, there are some tedious parts for sure, but regardless of everything else though, it's about the fact that we did somehow manage to tackle for this dungeon no problem. So, in addition to that though, is about the fact that we've, straight to the point though, is about the fact that we are almost done with our item inventory, and on top of that, we are basically almost done when it comes to the forms of the pieces of heart, and on top of that, we are pretty much almost done with all the figurines, and straight to the point though is about the fact that we now ended up in the final stretch of Link's Awakening Remake. So, yeah, everything else checks out there, and speaking of which though, in regards to the forms of the instrument of Siren, we did somehow claim ourselves the 8th and the final instrument, which is gonna be Thunder Drum. So yeah, everything else will be come to expect. So anyway, today for this video is about the fact that before we head over to the final stretch in the game, specifically if we somehow managed able to awaken the Wind Fish, we need to take care of the forms of the remaining aspects in terms of the forms of the Dungeon Maker part. So, but before we get to that though, let me quickly go back onto this particular Maple Village, so just to ensure for the fact that we can able to actually double check on other aspects in particular. So, for instance, it's about the fact that let's go for this particular building right there, that I suppose I forgot to do that ever since in last video, since in yesterday, mind you, and yep, that is where we're trying to place the Pokey right there. So either way, so I'm pretty sure about the fact that we're now on to the final figurine, but it's not going to be until once we finish the game first. So generally speaking, it's going to be one of those moments about the fact that if we somehow managed able to complete the game, obviously though, we can able to actually come across into post-game content, where, for instance, for example, in one of those games in particular for the Nintendo Switch, which is Super Mario Odyssey, that once you beat the game for the first time, basically though, you can able to actually access to the Mushroom Kingdom, and meanwhile, when it comes to New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, where basically though, if you manage to beat the game for the first time, you would able to actually access to one of those special worlds, which appears to be Superstar Road, but here's the catch though, you do need to acquire every single star coins you somehow need to be collected in each and every single world. And meanwhile, when it comes to Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, well, usually in Super Mario 3D World, that basically though you would able to actually access to one of those special worlds if you manage to beat the game for the first time, specifically if you try to beat the likes of Meowser, the final boss in 3D World. And on the subject, when it comes to Bowser's Fury, you would able to actually access to more mission objectives and during the forms of one of those islands you can able to actually explore into. So either way, that could be also applies with other games as well, I could probably think about on top of my head, but either way, so as you can see, we're about to be tackling through the 4th and the final task in terms of level 2 for the Dungeon Maker. So, yeah. So as you can see right there, I managed able to actually just make things a little bit more simplistic and stuff like that, as to be expected, just because I just don't want to make the actual process took a bit too long. So generally speaking, that's essentially how I roll. So either way, and as far as I'm aware, is about the fact that the reward we might able to consider getting after when we somehow managed to completely done every single aspect in terms of level 2 of the Dungeon Maker, obviously though we might able to actually guarantee to get ourselves the last piece of heart. So generally speaking, that was about the fact that once we do manage able to obtain the final piece of heart, then we can able to expect it able to increase our heart count up to 19. So generally speaking though, yeah, everything else will become to expect basically. So yeah, anyway, a few things I want to talk about is about the fact that, well, today's date of course there is the 16th of October today, in some cases in 2024 today, so naturally we're now on to the halfway point in terms of October before we move on to the 11th month in 2024, that's of course November. So generally speaking when it comes to November, there's only one game we are mostly excited about, and that's of course Mario Luigi Brothership, which I suppose no matter what though, we're going to be talking throughout all day long. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that there's also another thing I want to mention about, and that's what appears to be about the fact that certain bros attacks items do have their names, by the way. Well, we already know about the forms of, the jump helmets, alongside with the forms of Yahoo barrels, as well as the red shell and the green shell, but there are some other items. Well, specifically, one of them will make its return ever since in both Dream Team and Paper Jam. That's what appears to be Bomb Derby, which functions the same way as before, except this time around though we might able to see some more new animations. So I suppose that's a little bit more extreme, and on top of all that stuff though, makes the entire attacks this time around though a lot more flashier than the forms of how it does it on the 3DS games. So specifically Dream Team and Paper Jam. So generally speaking, yeah, everything else will be come to expect. And there's also some 3 other items has been named, at least as far as I do recall correctly. 3 of which is by the forms of Zapperator, and that item is specifically for Luigi. And on top of that, there's also the Flash Clock, which I'm pretty sure about the fact that it stops time, and basically though you have to deal with the actual quick time events until you're able to actually deal with the devastating attacks. So yeah, I believe that particular item will belongs to Mario. And there's also Mixed Tornado, which I could assure you it actually creates the massive tornado, assuming of course depending on how the actual ratings you somehow got. And generally speaking, that particular move will belongs to Luigi. So either way though, and I'm sure enough though, is about the fact that there's technically yet another item that is going to make its return after the events of technically my Luigi Partners in Time, which it could be something more relates to the Yoshi's Egg or something like that. But, of course, at the moment right now, we haven't exactly found any of the gameplay footage of it just yet, until the next few weeks to come. So, generally speaking, it's about the fact that there's also another thing worth noting for, is about the fact that, yes, indeed, until tomorrow, after this video releases, is that Super Mario Party Jamboree is releasing tomorrow. So because of this though, yeah, I'm still basically excited for it, and I cannot wait able to experience the game immediately, not only for offline play, but as well as online play as well. So just to ensure I can able to actually get more accustomed to the forms of some new mini games, and also some new boards to try out, and even especially noticeable with certain modes here and there as well. But usually, relatively speaking, we should probably save that particular topic in regards to the forms of Super Mario Party Jamboree until whenever we decide to do that particular Let's Play of the game, probably at some point until next year. Not this year, unfortunately, though, mainly because no matter what, though, we are still focusing on not only this game in particular, but as well as the forms of Luigi's Mansion 2, well, technically Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, because obviously, though, is about the fact that, again, we still cannot afford with the 3DS capture device, because not only is it incredibly hard to come by, but it's also very expensive as well. Although generally speaking, we were classified for able to try to be planning for Sonic Generations for the 3DS at some point, but we haven't exactly thought about this yet, especially concerning for the fact that at this point in time that Sonic is still working on, the majority of Sonic the Hedgehog 4, although technically speaking, I was about the fact that after all, he already did done both Episode 1 as well as Episode Metal, so as a result though, by that time until this weekend coming up, obviously though, he can now decide able to actually just to tackle through Episodes 2 eventually. So either way, and then once that's been done, well, suffice to say though, is about the fact that after all, we've only got about 9 more days left until Sonic X Shadow Generations is expected to be releasing at some point. So even then though, I'm also excited for that game as well, especially concerning for the fact that not only just trying to replay through the Sonic Generations all over again, because obviously I do love the game, despite the story is a bit underwhelming, but regardless of such though, is about the fact I can obviously play Sonic Generations on the go now, specifically the console version, not the 3DS counterparts, because obviously though with the 3DS version, you can obviously play the game on the go, because relatively speaking, we can able to experience the different amount of levels, as well as certain special stages that was not found on the console version, and on top of that, certain boss fights, specifically with Big Arm and Bio Lizard for Sonic's counterparts, and on top of that, Ink Emperor from the likes of Sonic Heroes. So either way, now I do apologize for that particular tongue twist in the end, folks, but that's just mainly because no matter what though, it has been about quite a few hours ago since I actually have last played this game for sure, especially concerning for the fact that, well, we just want to get this game done before we move on to the last batch of Let's Plays for 2024, if possible, before we move on to 2025, and straight to the point though is about the fact I'm still really hoping that next year will be a lot more better in terms of the forms of uploading schedules departments than the likes of this year was to me though, just because of a lot of issues that we've been having. So, but I suppose we'll let Maxi will mention more about it if we get on to the final Let's Play of 2024, but we can't tell you exactly what that is just yet, because obviously though we're still on October at this point, and straight to the point though is about the fact that, well, generally speaking though, as I stated this before, we're now on to the halfway point in terms of October, and usually relatively speaking though, yeah, everything else will become to expect of how the actual uploading schedules actually turns out. So, but I digress though. And also, straight to the point though, much like the forms of how it does it in Mario Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, as well as Dream Team and Paper Jam, obviously though is about the fact that if you try to level up in Mario Luigi Brothership, obviously though is about the fact that obviously though you get yourselves a different icon of your ranking, just like the forms of how it does it in Bowser's Inside Story, not only the original DS version, but as well as the 3DS remake, and on top of that with Dream Team and Paper Jam as well. However, there's a noticeable difference this time around, is that the game now actually tells you which specific level number you need to reach in order to able to actually increase the rank this time. So at the very least, that's actually kind of a cool thing, especially considering for the fact that unlike the forms of how it does on the previous games, that you have to wait for a certain amount of times until you're able to actually try to keep on leveling up, and then potentially speaking you can able to actually reach that certain level, and if you reach that specific rank, then obviously though, you can able to actually do whatever you want to select from for the specific special bonuses and stuff like that. So, and also, another thing is worth mentioning for actually, is about the fact that I've noticed about the forms of the actual image of Maria and General Robotnik from the likes of in that particular upcoming Sonic X Shadow Generations. The actual models with those two characters look a lot more better than the forms of how it does on the Sonic Adventure 2 counterparts. Well, despite the fact that the actual animation itself looks a bit dated? Well, regardless of such though, is about the fact that the body animations is still as improvement over the likes of Sonic Adventure, despite the fact that the actual lip syncing doesn't match up to the English dialogue and stuff like that, which, truth be told though, because both Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 was originally released on the Dreamcast back then, so either way though, yeah, at the very least though is about the fact that that's all I could really think about it. And also about the fact that until tomorrow as well, that potentially speaking of is about the fact that the grand finale of the My Little Pony Tale is going to be on its way until tomorrow. And let me tell you, if that particular cliffhanger happens again, I'm seriously going to have to be able to put up with the massive criticism I have in terms of Generation 5 as a whole. But that particular topic can wait, assuming of course about the fact that we'll let either Maxi will mention more about it, or if Sonic the Hedgehog will mention more about it. If, no matter what though, if Sonic decides to able to tackle through Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2 in the forms of this upcoming weekend. So, either way though, and as far as I'm aware, for what I've double checked in Journey Forms of while looking back on Journey Forms of in Generation 5 of My Little Pony, specifically Make Your Mark series, is about the fact that it still managed to receive 23 episodes and 4 specials, and I was like, that seriously is not enough, especially concerning for the fact that, well, it reviewed pretty horribly, and in terms of the forms of the massive backlash, I will admit it though right away, it is such a massive disappointment while looking back on it though, especially concerning for the fact that don't even get me started in Journey Forms that particular unexpected cliffhanger, where basically though is about the fact that the actual series ends if the actual villain decides to go for the portal, which pretty much leads her into the forms of Maritime Bay. And generally speaking though, that seriously is messed up, especially concerning for the fact that I will admit it though right away, I didn't get back into the forms of Make You Mark series at all since when I first saw it back in Journey Forms of it last year, And relatively speaking though, I feel like that series is dull now, so I just seriously did not enjoy the series anymore. So generally speaking though, but then again though, if the cliffhanger will happen during the forms of Telltale, then I'm seriously about to give up on watching or getting hyped about the forms of Generation 5. But that's just me, especially concerning for the fact that, well, it does have its potential, but it's just about the fact that I just really wish there was actually more effort into it. So, but that's the way how I feel about it, I guess, especially concerning for the fact that anyone else do have their own opinions, and myself included, so understandably so. So either way, so now we got ourselves the final piece of heart, so that pretty much does it for level 2 crafted stuff. So now let's move on to, oh boy, level 3 of those specific tasks. So yeah, wish me luck. 62 minutes. 62 minutes. 62 minutes off screen for the sake of the forms of trying to able to get this thing constructed. And let me tell you, doing this process is a nightmare, especially concerning for the fact that not only you can't move those specific panels sometimes, but it's also about the fact you need to able to think about the corresponding placements of these stairs. And let me tell you, the process of doing this is a pain, especially concerning that, again, when it comes to doing this off screen, it honestly took me about 62 minutes, or an hour and 2 minutes to be exact, which I have no idea how I somehow questioning that. I mean, let me tell you something, once we've done every single tasks in terms of the dungeon maker, I don't think it's possible for me to able to actually tackle for some optional dungeon making tasks, because as far as I'm aware, the only reward you do get is of course rupees if you decide to able to actually keep on buying those chamber stones. But usually, relatively speaking, we'll save that particular topic and during at some point, probably until tomorrow or next Tuesday, depending on the forms of the actual specific stuff is going on. So either way, but that's besides the point. So, oh yeah, speaking of which though, is about the fact that there is technically a bonus ending. If you ever watched the full experience for Sonic X Shadow Generations Dark Beginnings, well, apparently though, there was actually that particular bonus ending if you pay attention to it well enough, if you managed able to watch all 3 episodes combined into one. Basically though, it actually shows us a brief little moment where Black Doom was actually appeared. So generally speaking though, I'm still very curious to know of how that's going to turn out. Well, then again though, we'll have to wait and find out until 9 days from now, until that particular game is going to be releasing during that time. So either way, and also, speaking of which though, in regards to the forms of Shadow Generations, as far as I'm aware, I've heard they might be able to actually bring in some more branching paths than any other Sonic game. So generally speaking, there's actually multiple ways you can able to actually traverse into certain stages in Shadow Generations. But either way though, that's as far as I can try to say about that for right now. But unfortunately though, I did somehow manage able to find out, similar to the forms of how it does it when I mentioned about this earlier, since in yesterday, usually relatively speaking it's about the fact that much like in Super Mario Party Jamboree, unfortunately though, not only does Sonic X Shadow Generations have been leaked, but same applies with the forms of maybe Mario Luigi Brothership as well. Like seriously, every time when new games is almost fastly approaching, something tells me about the fact that we have to deal with the forms of trying to avoid a lot of internet leakers out there, especially concerning for the fact that we don't want to get ourselves spoiled things too much, especially concerning for the fact that at this point in time, that, like I stated before, that tomorrow that Super Mario Party Jamboree is going to be releasing, and in addition to that though, is about the fact that, like I stated before, we've only got about 9 days left until Sonic X Shadow Generations is about to be approaching. And finally, in terms of the forms of Mario Luigi Brothership, I'm pretty sure at this point in time, we've only got about 22 more days to go, or technically almost 3 weeks left until that game is going to be approaching. So, at the very least, that's what I can really think about it. In terms of the forms of the actual specific updates on how many days left for specific games is about to be approaching. So anyway, also about the fact that there's another thing I want to address something, and that's what appears to be about the fact that one of those games in particular, which appears to be Date Everything, apparently though, that game is being pushed back until February in 2025. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that it's all about dating simulation or something like that. Well, I haven't exactly followed up the forms of that particular genre to begin with, because again, I'm more into the forms of platforming and all that stuff, despite the fact that, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that I managed able to actually still waiting for my packages to arrive eventually at some point, which appears to be that Rayman game on the Game Boy Advance that usually focuses on isometric view platforming. And in addition to that though, I still felt very regretted to be able to actually get myself Sonic Free Riders, not only for the sake of the forms of trying to add that to our Sonic games collection, but it's also about the fact that, like I stated before, since in yesterday, it's actually ridiculously cheap in terms of the actual price tag and all that stuff. Certainly a lot more cheaper than the forms of how it does it in Sonic Boom Rise of Loic to me though, just because obviously though it's about the fact that my guess is about the fact that Sonic Free Riders did manage to sell quite well, alongside with the forms of the Xbox 360 Connect, which I do know for a fact that the Xbox 360 Connect nowadays is also getting ridiculously cheap as well. So I still have no idea of how I supposed able to get that particular peripheral, but we'll have to wait and see what happens until I decide able to try out Sonic Free Riders at some point in the future. Mind you about the fact that I did manage able to choose once again the very good condition when it comes to two of those games in particular, including the forms of the next and probably the final Nintendo Wii peripheral of mine. That's what appears to be none other than the red Wii nunchuck. So just to ensure for the fact that it can able to actually match up the actual exact same color as my red Wii remote, or specifically Wii Remote Plus these days, especially like I stated before that the Motion Plus peripheral is now built into it, so that begs the question for that, I guess. So either way, it's also worth noting for as well is about the fact I'm pretty sure we've only got about 15 more days to go until the most unfortunate thing is about to happen. Not only for Little Big Planet 3 for the PlayStation 4, but as well as say plus with the forms of maybe the PS3 version as well. I haven't exactly thought about it, but it's also with the forms of the entire DLC for Little Big Planet that is about to be getting delisted at some point, as I stated before, since until when it gets to Halloween. I'm sure about the fact that Maxi has technically already mentioned about that during the forms of being the longest mission in the entire game in Luigi's Mansion 2, which is of course a train to catch, but of course, like I stated before, how do I keep on messing things up with this particular specific jump? Well, generally speaking, I was about the fact that sometimes those little small ladders are pretty tricky to able to actually hop into. Well, generally speaking, I was about the fact that unfortunately though, I did somehow messed up that specific defeating enemy order early on, but that's just mainly because it's been a very long while since we've got to that point, since in during the forms of in the beginning portion of the game. Mind you, it was actually somewhere on the second dungeon, if I'm assuming so anyway. So, yeah, I will admit though right away though is about the fact that it's hard to memorize it sometimes when it comes to looking back on other things worth noting for. And there's also another things worth mentioning for actually, out of nowhere, since in about a month ago, that apparently though, that one of the creators from Kingdom Hearts, which appears to be Tatsume Noma, says about the fact that he's planning to retire in a few years time and wants to finish Kingdom Hearts 4, which I was like, oh no. I mean, I was assuming about the fact that the series will continue on, but apparently though is about the fact that it's kind of unfortunate about the fact that if Tatsume Monra, well, despite the fact I misbudged the actual name, by the way, because it's been a very long while since I actually mentioned something relates to Kingdom Hearts since in about a couple of days ago, but still, it is incredibly sad if that's gonna happen, especially concerning for the fact that, well, still, no matter what though, is about the fact that two of those Kingdom Hearts games is still currently in development for, not only for smartphones, but as well as the forms of potentially the next generation of consoles, specifically for the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and stuff like that. Because, well, straight to the point though is about the fact that, well, I'm still really hoping about the fact that we can able to see some more information on not only Kingdom Hearts Missing Link, but as well as the forms of Kingdom Hearts 4 as well. But I suppose no matter what though, we'll have to wait and see what happens during at some point until, you know, the next few months time. So generally speaking though, it is rather shocking to see, and it's also at the same time, though, feels a bit kind of sad at the same time, so, but that's just me. So of course we meet again with the this familiar chest part, so just to ensure we can able to angle our specific throws and stuff like that. So either way though, so let's just go ahead and backtrack for a bit, so just in case I don't want to able to mess up with this particular enemy order again, so just to ensure for the fact that we can able to guarantee to get ourselves the nightmare key. So in fact, kind of thinking about it though, is about the fact I'm pretty sure we've almost done when it comes to able to keep on collecting the nightmare keys as far as this is concerned, because generally speaking though, it's about the fact that, like you've already noticed right from the start though, it's about the fact that we did indeed manage to able to conclude every single main dungeons in the game, at least if you also want to include Color Dungeon, but you can able to actually replay through Color Dungeon as many times as you want by changing the specific gears, ranging from the blue tunic or red tunic for the sake of the forms of offense or defense. So usually for attack power and protection. So yeah, you get the idea for this point. So. And it's also worth noting for, actually, is about the fact that I suppose that technically Maxi has already mentioned about this briefly in the past few days or something like that. That obviously does about the fact that, yes, indeed, like we've already established that before, that we haven't exactly got that long left. Until specifically those about the fact that the BBFC Create the Card Competition 2024 is almost approaching. Like, generally speaking, that was about the fact that we've almost got about exactly 2 months left until that particular thing is about to happen. And generally speaking, that was about the fact I'm pretty sure about the fact that the winner will be decided via a judging panel ahead of the Forms of the Movies UK release on December 21st in 2024. So generally speaking, that was about the fact that we can able to see what really happens through that time. And then again though, the actual specific rules for this though is divided into a few different rule sets, ranging from it needs to be bright, colorful designs that filled the box will produce the best results, and any medium can be used like felt tip, crayons, and paint inks, etc. Coloring pencils can be used, but they don't tend to show up the best on the big screen, but we will recommend using pens instead, just to make things a little bit more vibrant. So it's what I classify for saying, because when it comes to coloring pencils, sometimes it does manage able to blend in, but other times though you can't really see the actual vibrant colors and stuff like that. So I suppose no matter what though, these kids nowadays decide able to use not only paint, but as well as the forms of pens essentially, because it'll make things a lot more effective when it comes to the forms of vibrant colors. And usually, relatively speaking, that's as far as I can say about that particular topic. And the next rule they did somehow include, which appears to be no glitter, because that might have felt a bit kind of weird for that particular art style. And there's also another rule they did say that please do not fold the artwork, use staples or sellotape, so just to ensure you don't want to ruin that particular condition of that particular massive creativity of your artwork and stuff like that when it comes to the forms of the actual specific BBFC rating card. So either way, so before I get into more details about this though, it's about the fact that I suppose we should probably do one more task, so yeah. Okay, so apparently though, this particular layout is nowhere near as bad as the forms of how it does on the previous one, thankfully, because obviously though, there aren't any stairs involved. And from what I can tell about the fact that the actual layout of the dungeon itself, we're about to be utilizing this, is that it's almost like a shape like a bottle. So I believe something tells me we can able to expect able to get ourselves the final inventory item, which appears to be the third and the final fairy bottle. So I suppose that might be to be the case. So either way though, and also as you can tell, that the restrictions for this particular task this time around, as you can see, that we actually start things off with only 3 hearts this time around. But thankfully though, since we're going to be able to be using blue tunic for the whole time, this means about the fact that trying to tackle for this particular task with the blue tunic makes things a lot more easier, especially concerning, as I say this before, the defense is actually really high. So generally speaking now, everything else will become to expect until then. So Yeah, I suppose no matter what though, it's about the fact that after we're done with this particular task right here, I suppose we've only down to 2 more tasks left. So generally speaking, we are basically almost done of the Dungeon Maker before we head over to the final part of the Forms of Link's Awakening remake for the Nintendo Switch, which is of course the Windfish's Egg. So anyway, back into what I was saying about the forms of some few more roles. In terms of the forms of this particular BBFC create a card competition for Sonic the Hedgehog 3 movie. I've already mentioned about the fact that obviously though staples or sellotape is required in order able to actually make the artwork a little bit more nicer. And on top of that, if creating a college, please do not make the sheet thicker or than 2 pieces of paper, because as far as I'm aware, it'll make things a little bit weird, I guess. And there's also avoiding metallic finishes over large areas. And finally, most importantly, make sure the design is inspired by the Sonic the Hedgehog universe. So, understandable, because obviously that is about the fact that, well, if you try to make a crossover poster, like specifically like Mario and stuff, it will not count, because obviously though, they want to keep things strictly Sega, and on top of that, it's only going to be Sonic the Hedgehog themed. So, also I found it a little bit interesting, in regards to the forms of Sonic the Hedgehog movies, as far as I'm aware, that when it comes to the forms of Paramount did manage to pay specific actors, well, I did somehow manage to find out that Jim Carrey as Dr. Robotnik, and same applies with the forms of Gerald Robotnik as well, somehow Paramount has paid, or paying Jim Carrey for a grand total of $12 million. So yeah, that's actually pretty good, especially concerning for the fact that, obviously though, Jim Carrey is the huge highlight in terms of the Sonic movies as Dr. Robotnik and stuff like that, and he was a great actor after all. And because usually, while looking back on the previous films, as far as I'm aware, like for instance, on the first Sonic movie, that Paramount did somehow paying Jim Carrey for about $4 million back on the first movie, and meanwhile for Sonic the Hedgehog 2, it did somehow manage to get even double the amount, which makes it a grand total of $8 million. But now, in journey forms of the upcoming Sonic the Hedgehog 3 movie, obviously though, recently though, it's about the fact that Paramount is paying Jim Carrey for a grand total of $12 million. So yeah, that was actually very impressive. And meanwhile, when it comes to Keanu Reeves as Shadow the Hedgehog, it did say $5 million. And when it comes to the forms of Eldris Elba as Knuckles the Echidna, well obviously though it did somehow mentions about the fact that Paramount is paying him for a grand total of $3 million. And on the subject for this matter though, James Marsden as Tom Wachowski did somehow manage able to got for about $1 million, and Ben Schwartz as Sonic the Hedgehog did somehow manage to got about $500,000. And when it comes to the forms of other actors, I couldn't figure out the forms of the number figures and stuff like that, because mind you, it has been about quite a few days ago since I actually have mentioned stuff in relation to Sonic the Hedgehog movie brand. Although, there's also another thing I totally forgot to mention about this ever since in Journey Forms of it yesterday. Out of nowhere, that KepKing74 did manage able to, did meet up with me, or specifically Stuart, mind you, and he did manage able to give us a freebie gift, which as a result though, according to the forms of the actual specific offering, he did somehow gave me an unexpected DVD, which appears to be Knuckles the series, and I was like, okay, I wasn't expecting you somehow give me that, Stuart, especially concerning for the fact that, well, the reason why he decided to give me the actual DVD is because, well, apparently from what I've heard, that Stuart is not overly keen on the series as much, which is understandable, especially concerning for the fact that we've already talked about that ever since in about a couple of months ago, that obviously though, it's more likely a wage show rather than Knuckles himself, although the reason why we somehow got this now for the DVD version is most likely for the sake of collection's sake, which that could be also applies for Sonic Freeriders as well for the Xbox 360 Kinect, which as a result though, like I said this before, we somehow got the game for quite cheap rather than a full price game back in 2010, so that's the reason why that back in the day Though I suppose that Sonic did somehow talk to me about this, that back in 2010, that he obviously did manage to got himself Sonic Colors on the Wii, as opposed to Sonic Free Riders for the Xbox 360 Kinect, because obviously though we haven't exactly got the Xbox 360 back then until 2011, and in addition to that though is about the fact that I've sort of heard about the fact that the Kinect felt a bit unresponsive at times when it comes to specific track record of your body and stuff like that, which truth be told though is probably because no matter what though, I gladly missed out on that, because obviously though I've heard some negative things about it though, despite its huge success. Well, regardless of everything else though, is about the fact it's probably best if we talk more about the forms of the Xbox 360 Kinect during at some point in a later time, because for now, we are straight to the point though, we've now ended up in the final stretch of this particular task, and straight to the point, we can able to face off against with the very first boss in the game again, except this time around though is about the fact that it's now ended up on the very end of this particular dungeon task. So either way though, even though I was expecting to try to do this particular task with no damage run, but that's not the case unfortunately, mainly because no matter what though, I didn't pay attention to the forms of some other aspects and all that stuff. But there we go, so we are basically done with this particular task, and straight to the point, we can now able to actually access to the final inventory item. Well, not only for this, but also, get this, the third and a final fairy bottle. So this means we can now store up to 3 fairies within a separate bottles. So yeah, that's actually pretty top notch and everything. So now I'm pretty sure it's about the fact that we've only got 2 tasks left until we basically guarantee to get ourselves the true final reward. But then again though, we'll have to wait and see what happens during at some point until tomorrow, because well, just want to get these dungeon maker stuff out of the way before we head over to the final stretch of the game, as I stated before. So with that being said folks, is that we get endings of this point right here. So join me next time for more of Let's Play of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening Remake for the Nintendo Switch. Is that we're about to finish up every single aspect in terms of the Dungeon Maker by tackling through the final 2 tasks in level 3 of those specific tasks. So I'll see you guys until tomorrow. Later fellas.